mind a lot. Don't need no time watch. I don't know how I got you in my pocket spot. Yeah, that's babe, need you every day. You like my oxygen. Make it seem like the barging down. Got my heart no barging in. From the bed to the floor to the couch. Might wake the neighbors up.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Breakfast with Bob at Super League Malibu. My name is Bob Babbitt. We're brought to you by Master Spas as fuels go longer, HOKA Let's Fly, deboer wetsuits, Form Smart Swim goggles, Zoot Sports, the original triathlon brand, Quintana, Premium Plus Sports, and of course our Challenged Athletes Foundation. We've now raised $159 million in our first 30 years, sent out over 44,000 grants to keep challenged athletes in the game of life through sport. Another guy who knows charity very, very well, two-time Ironman World Champion, longtime friend, Mr. Chris McCormack. How you doing, Mecca?
Good, Bob. How are you?
I am spectacular. You're wearing a Phoenix hat, so let's start out with that. Talk about that, because you have been a guy who believes in charity, and Phoenix has done great stuff.
Yeah, the Phoenix Foundation was launched in 2018. It's about getting kids back into sport, giving them the opportunities through sport. Built out of Switzerland, and it's sort of become a huge part of my life. We're going all around the world with it and putting events on for kids, and especially post the pandemic where a lot of stuff got destroyed. So a lot in Asia, a lot in Africa.
And with the Brownlee brothers.
And with the Brownlee brothers, with Nicola Spirig. Yes. A lot of the old triathletes. It's been great to be able to engage with them as they're sort of moving on to different parts of their career, to have them move and sort of do something charitable and deliver events for us. It's been great.
So talk a little bit about what we're here in Malibu. They got big surf. Super League was part of your vision, right? This event. And the series. Talk about just sort of the genesis of Super League, how it started and where it's at now.
Yeah, Super League was sort of the opportunity presented itself in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
I was in Moscow and I had met with a whole group of people there. There was a sports conference and I had the opportunity to have a wider discussion with a group of investors that were London-based. And they were very interested in investing in endurance sports.
Mm-hmm.
And I pitched the concept of Super League Triathlon, which was a series very similar to a series of racing we did in Australia.
The International Triathlon Grand Prix.
Triathlon Grand Prix racing. So people who have been around the sport a long time would probably remember that racing.
Yes.
And that was some of the best development racing I'd ever done as a junior. I think the entire Australian and New Zealand contingent in that early 90s into the late 90s, early millennium, even Simon Whitfield, who went on to win the Olympics, were byproducts of that style of racing.
No question.
And so I saw the opportunity to probably bring it to a new generation and we pitched for a round of funding, which we won, and Michael Dulst and I sort of got down to business and said, okay, let's bring back this style of racing, which is really short, dynamic, spectator-friendly racing, sort of like the mixed relays that you're doing at the Olympic Games now, very short, but athletes racing over different formats that test them. It's really cool.
Eliminator,
the enduro,
and triple mix.
Triple mix, yeah. Triple mix mixes up the disciplines and the athletes. The great thing is the new generation of athletes are being exposed to it, and I take a lot of solace. I said in 2016 there'll be two different style of short course athletes. There'll be the ones that race Super League and the ones that don't. And you'll see that correlate into the Olympic Games, and 5 of the top 5 in the Olympics, or men's and women's, that all come out of Super League racing.
Super League racing, because what Super League does, the high intensity, all the transitions, you have to become just exceptional across the board.
Yeah, and it's consequence driven. You have to be aggressive. You have to take chances. You have, if you don't, there's true consequences. You're eliminated if you fall more than 90 seconds behind, and you're eliminated from the race. So you constantly have to push and refine those smaller skills. And I think just for any young aspiring athlete, it's the only way forward. And I take a lot of strength. I was back home in Australia earlier this year and doing a lot with the development of events down there for young athletes. And all the young athletes I talk to, the 15, 16, 17-year-old kids that have aspirations of going to Olympic Games or being professional triathletes, they all want to do Super League, which is really cool. Really cool. And that's because that's sort of how I came through. I watched athletes like Greg Welsh, McKeely Jones come through that similar style of racing in Australia. And it was on television. I wanted to do that. What came after was, but it was sort of bringing that younger generation of athletes through a series that refines their craft and it gives them a platform to do other things in the sport is key.
And with Malibu, it's one of the few races really on the circuit where you get surf.
Yeah.
And there's this when you get towards October, there's bigger surf than we normally get. So I think you might have 4, 5, 6 foot surf.
They're talking 4 foot, 5 foot for race day. I know a lot of the Europeans are panicked. The
Kiwis and Aussies are like, "Oh, this is the best thing ever."
This is unreal, but it's I think having these different styles of events and different sort of, a beach start with waves brings a different dynamic into the racing, and it just makes series more interesting. It's always unpredictable. And this event last year, Taylor Spivey, a local girl, she's injured this year. She won the event over
using surfing, body surfing.
Exactly,
won the race for her,
and that's what's really cool about it. And hearing the discussions in breakfast with the athletes, that's
what they're talking about.
That's all they're talking about,
right?
Which is cool.
Yeah. It's very cool. So when I look at Australia and longer distance and 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, you guys all win Ironman, right?
Yeah.
You win 2, Corey wins 3, and Pete Jacobs won 1, right? And then basically we've really not seen the Aussies at the longer distance scene do great since then.
Yeah, we had, and don't forget little Luke McKenzie was back there.
Second place.
He was second place. So there was a real dynamic of young Aussies doing well. And now we've got young Max Newman. He was 4th. He was injured this year, but he was 4th last year in Kona.
Right.
But I think the Australian triathlon scene, and I mean this with the utmost respect, Ironman to some degree came down there and became the only game in town. The only game in town, and it killed off the community races, and it killed off the ability for young athletes to come and do events. I came through my local, like if you're a California native, a lot of kids came through the Malibu event. There's 5,500 people do this race, right? So when you kill off those short races, it starts to kill off the feeder into the.
You need a welcome
sport.
mat.
You do.
You need
exactly
a welcome mat, and it's funny because that's one of my big pushes right now. Is you need the pool triathlons, you need the sprint races, you need the middle, the Olympic distance format, because what happens is people come into the sport and say, I want an M.Dot tattoo.
Yes.
And then they spend 6 months, they hire a coach, and every coach out there makes his living off of Ironman, 70.3, and marathon.
Totally.
Nobody's paying a coach to train them for Olympic or sprint.
Yeah.
And so what happens is then these athletes are training for that, they get their M.Dot tattoo, and they're out of the sport.
Exactly.
They didn't grow up with getting sprint. It hasn't become a lifestyle.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing that drives me a little crazy.
And we talk about the golden years of American racing with Dave and Piggy and Mark Allen. You had the Bud Light series, right? You had a series here of short course racing, and people don't talk enough about the wars those guys had in those short distance events.
Absolutely.
They were some of the best racing I ever got to watch as a kid. So that a healthy super tri level, short distance racing series worldwide.
Yes.
Brings in the talent, and you see that in Europe. The best triathletes in the world right now are European. Look at their short course racing. You've got the French Grand Prix, you've got Bundesliga, you've got so much short course racing available to young athletes. It's just a constant feeder. And the countries that don't have that are falling further and further behind.
Well, I remember you saying years ago, and this was the real racing was in Europe.
Yeah.
Where people were racing here in the States, and then they'd come to Kona and get their butt kicked. It's like you got all the Germans coming in, and even now when I look at the results from Nice and even from World Tri.
Yes, totally.
French, German, UK.
Yeah.
It's all the other countries, and US is up there, especially on the women's side.
Totally.
But we still have, Gwen is older, Katie is older. I mean, we don't have the 22, 23-year-olds that are coming in and kicking butt and taking names, except for Taylor.
And that's because they're entering. If you want to be a triathlete, you have to enter at that half Ironman level. And for a lot of us, it's a bit.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. And I find I'm definitely old now, but I definitely think, I looked at the short course athletes when I was younger as something I can do. It's something I could compare myself to. And I sort of saw Ironman was where I wanted to get to, without question. Always wanted to do that. But I wanted to wait my time. I'd heard all the stories about how difficult it was, and I needed to be a bit older. But I think without that feeder, you're talking that platform of racing where you can come through, I'm not really inspired by, if I'm a 16-year-old kid, I'm not hyper inspired by, 45, 50-year-old guys doing Ironman. No. I want to see Vincent Louis, or I want to see Leo Bergy, I want to see Alex Yee, I want to see these, because I can compare myself, and they're more they wear their hat sideways. They represent what I represent, and I think that's really, really important. And that's what we're trying to do with Super League is bring that back to really talk to a younger audience and say, hey, this sport's cool because there's so many options now.
Well, and my favorite part about this, and we chatted a number of years ago when you said, hey, we want to bring a Super League event. We want to bring a new event to the U.S.
Yes.
We're big in Asia, we're big in Europe, we have nothing in the States. And you said, hey, we want to start one. And it's like, no, don't start one.
Yeah, totally.
Buy Malibu, Chicago, or New York. Yeah. Now you guys have bought
All
Malibu,
three.
Chicago, and New York, right? But those are the three most important Olympic format type of, not Olympic format, Olympic distance events, age group events, where you're going to have 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 participants. And here you got the studios, you got all the rest of that. You guys will have a big impact on growing age group Olympic distance racing again.
And we hope to do that, and we hope to sort of create that majors, because these events, then they're events that have a history.
Yes.
Right?
Oh,
There's definitely a long, long history around all. This is the 38th year of Malibu. I think we're in 35 of Chicago.
Yeah.
Like there, and all the greatest stars of our sport have won and competed in these events. So I want to sort of bring back that whole narrative, that whole discussion around the importance of these majors, and call these events almost like majors.
They are majors.
And bring back the desire for athletes to be a part of that and race in these events.
Yeah, and in the U.S., I think we have like 8 full Ironmans. There's been a lot of, especially since COVID, a lot of events have gone away. Yeah. Carlsbad Triathlon, Super Frog, Super Seal, Wildflower. A lot of these legendary events are gone. And to be able to get people into age group racing where they're going Olympic and sprint, then it becomes a lifestyle again.
Yeah.
And
totally.
That's what we have to do, because it's not a lifestyle when you're talking Ironman. Yeah,
the community, and you also got to remember the importance, and I guess we're learning that, especially in the United States, the importance of community. An event like Malibu is in a very tight, strong community.
Yes.
And there's a lot of passion around that, and holding on to events and what those events look like and what they represent to the group, how much disruption's in play and we had a big push this year to keep Malibu, which we ended up winning with the council. We sat down with them, and they realised that this event's a legacy event. It's as true to Malibu as the surf. It's
no
been
question.
Here for so long. So I think it's important for those events to remain. And Chicago,
same thing.
Yeah, it's been there forever.
Yeah.
I used to read about it in the magazines, wanting to
I
one day
raced
do
there
that.
in the early 80s. It was like after USTS started in 82. I think it started like 84, 83, 84. And it was riding down Lakeshore Drive, right?
Yeah.
My favorite story, riding down Lakeshore Drive, and there's a guy with his wetsuit sleeves tied around his neck, right, on a bike, right? And I'm like, dude, what are you doing? He goes, I spent $300 for this. I'm going to leave it in a parking lot? Like my favorite story. Because
funny.
those are the guys we want in our sport.
Totally.
Just come in and understand that this is an equal opportunity abuser. It doesn't matter if you're big or small or missing a body part, in a wheelchair. You can do our sport.
Yes,
and the
agree.
sport will make you better at everything you do.
Absolutely agree.
Right.
And these events are cool, and I think it's up to us now that we own these events, and I'm as you know, very passionate about the history of our sport. I don't think we have a lot, and we don't embrace it and talk about it enough. So I really want to make sure that push is done on our end to really highlight how we got here, what this represents, and how important these events are in the ecosystem of triathlon worldwide.
So when I look back at your career, I think one of the most pivotal moments was we had a triathlete by the name of Simon Lessing, who was just the greatest guy on the planet. Yep. And you had Worlds coming up, and you decided you're going to train with this guy. Yeah. But that was a great move on your part, because when you train with somebody, you learn their strengths and weaknesses. And on race day, you weren't afraid of the moment. You went for it. And I think everybody would have said, Simon Lessing is going to win this race.
Yeah, I got away with it. It's still, to my, as you get older, you look back and everyone always talks about my Kona wins, only because the journey to those successes, as you know, was so difficult. I thought it was going to happen a lot quicker than it did. And I see people like Sam Laidlow now. I'm like, oh man, 2 attempts and 2. It's like, people make it look so easy.
I know.
I wish I had that sort of run at it. But for me, that World Championships was in '97 against the great Simon Lessing, who was a club member of mine in France, French team, was the greatest win of my career.
No question.
I was young. I bookended my career with 2 World Triathlons, ITU World Championships, and the long course of 2012. Yes. So my whole career sort of bookended by these amazing races within the World Triathlon Series. But that event in, there was 100,000 people in Australia. It's on the eve of the first ever Olympic Games, with triathlon making its debut. My mum and dad were there. It was the last race my mother ever got to see me compete in. So for me, it's a really, really special event. And to beat Simon Lessing, who...
Oh, he's the best.
He's the best. And you as you get older, you can accept it. When you're an athlete, you try and put on this bravado and pretend that you can beat everyone. But Simon Lessing and Simon Whitfield are the 2 athletes that, when they're on form, are better than me. Like I just have to. They're 3 disciplines. They are better athletes than me. And you try and lie to yourself when you're an athlete that you're better than them, and you try and convince yourself. But they and to beat him, I beat him. I raced Simon 40 times in my career. I think I beat him 6. So he was my Achilles heel within the sport. But to me, he had my measure. And to beat him at a World Championships, it makes it hyper expensive. The one picture that's on my wall at home in my office is the World Championship podium of myself, Hamish, and Simon Lessing.
When people talk about our pro triathletes, and that's one of the reasons I love interviewing them, because I think a lot of people think that Chris McCormack was identified when he was 8 years old, like LeBron James and like Beckham, and then he went through their protocol and was funded, and then all of a sudden he became the best in the world, right? There was a process there. Yes. And people don't get the fact that you had a real job, that you were looking down in the Sydney Opera House, that you were an accountant, and you basically were getting your check every week, but you had a dream. Yes,
it was all a dream. And I had a family that didn't quite grasp that dream. We come from Australia.
Education was all mattered.
First, and I try and explain it it's like triathlon was this new American sport. It was the late 80s, early 90s. Greg Walsh had finished 3rd in the 89 Hawaiian Ironman.
Yes.
It made news in Australia. In 1990, he won the World Championships in Disney. So suddenly there's this sport thrust onto our televisions. And it was a sport of swimming, bike, and running. I'm thinking, I do all those 3 things. You know what I mean? And he's an Australian that's winning it. And it looked glamorous, but light. It was America. Everything's big over here. And I remember thinking, this is what I want to do. And then I was seeing the checks they were winning, and I was reading the magazines. Everyone lived through magazines. Like, everything's so quick now.
I know.
I used to read the same magazine 100 times. And watch the VHS or the videos that we get back. So my desire to just experience that was driven purely because I was inspired by the people that did it. I love the stories, and I guess editors of magazines and writers like yourself were integral in that, because you wrote the beautiful pieces that captured people, and you lived so much through it. So I always wanted to do it, but I tell the young juniors now, it's like telling your parents you want to be a professional Spartan racer. Like, it's almost, triathlon was sort of this this sort of new age. What is it? Yeah. Even my dad was like, "Why is it in the Olympics?" I'm like, "No, it's you swim." He's like, "Why?" So you're a jack of all trades, master of none. I'm like, "Dad, no, it's like really cool. It's American sport, and don't be stupid." That was sort of all. And I knew everything about it because I was reading about it, but my parents were like, "Oh, whatever."
And it wasn't in the paper every day. It wasn't in the paper. It wasn't on regular telly.
Yeah. And so I was so driven to do that. But my parents just didn't get it, and then obviously the success of. And Greg Walsh and McKeely Jones, I constantly bring them up. But because they grew up in southern Sydney where I grew up, they were constantly in our local papers. It gave me enough merit to say, Dad, see these people. If I'd grown up anywhere else, I wouldn't have had that exposure to them and been reading them in our local papers all the time, their successes. So I wouldn't have been able to push Dad across the line to tell me pursue it. So when I took a job out of college, I was working at Bankers Trust, as you said, looking down at Sydney Opera House and balancing books at month end and hating life, thinking 22, this is what I got. And I threw it all in and quit and went overseas.
Well, but not just that. You go in and tell your boss, when you told your boss what you're going to do.
He laughed.
He said, "You're going to be a professional triathlete. That's the silliest thing in the world.
You've got a job. You're the luckiest person in the world. You're going to be a professional what triathlete?"
Well, then you couldn't tell your dad. Because you were worried how he'd react. Yeah. So he would take you to train?
He'd take me to work every morning. He'd pick me up because I wasn't living at home, and I'd put a suit on. Yeah. And I'd drive.
And you already quit the job?
I quit the job.
Yeah.
It took me 2.5 weeks to pluck up the courage to tell him. And he's like, "What have I been taking you the last 2 weeks?" I said, "Oh, you drop me off, I catch a train home, go training, go back there. You pick me up on the way home." So it was an interesting time, but I look at it now, I wouldn't have done it any different because in the end, that's why I think that 97 race we talked about. So this is 95 when I ended up going overseas, and 97 for me, winning that World Championships at home.
That validated to mom and dad.
I said, "Dad, this is what I do." There was 100,000 live TV, $100,000 paycheck. It was a big day in Australian sport, and I remember Dad just at the finish line, just couldn't believe the enormity. I said, "This is our sport, Dad." Because when you're an Australian and you go overseas, you race overseas, your parents don't see it. No. And there wasn't the TV coverage of it and the streaming and the Facebooks and none of that existed. It was a phone call, "Mum, I won," and Dad trying to wind the call up so it didn't cost too much. and that was it. They just live through your stories. But to come home and race at home and for them to see the sport in its enormity, and then it realised it's going to the Olympic Games. It sort of validated the sport and validated my decision.
And it's not, when you're in Australia, it's not like you say, I'll go to Europe for the weekend.
Yeah, totally.
You're making a major commitment at the age of 22. You're leaving your family, your friends, everything, going to Europe, and saying, okay, if I race in France on Friday, then I can take the train to Switzerland, right? And if I take the slow train, that means I can sleep on the train and save a hotel night. Then you get there and you can race over the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, and hopefully win like $1,000.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. You'd plan everything. You buy the magazines, flick to the back of the old triathlon magazines, and see the race. I didn't even know the towns. You'd look then on the big maps, and okay, it's a 1-day train. I can get that. Sleep. Wait, the races are always in the afternoon, so you're able to pick up some money, and you just tried to meet people, and then you go to the next race on the Saturday. If you could get 3 races in a row, it'd be fantastic.
Yes,
because you were living
no cost,
living paycheck to paycheck, and then trying to make a name where my dream was to have a race director just pay for my ACOM and my accommodation and travel. I thought, if I could just get that means I get to keep all my prize money. That was sort of my aspiration at the beginning. And then I never thought of sponsors, and then suddenly it was team contracts, and then sponsorships come, and it's just a beautiful process. Like for everything, it sets you up for life. It just sets you up that nothing's for free. You have to work for everything.
Yes.
And I wouldn't change anything. It was the hardest living I did, but I look back and I tell my kids now, it was the most beautiful time in my life. I loved it.
Well, the reality is you really had no obligations.
Yes,
totally. You didn't have to pay a lot of bills because you had nothing, and then you're going to a hotel. You'd rent a room for like 3 nights or 1 night, right? And then you'd like sort of hide out, so they didn't know they were there for 3 nights, and then sneak out the window.
That's exactly what it is. I remember climbing out of a window with Max Fegan and Simon Knowles, 2 Australians, picking me up in a car below because they were knocking on the door to get paid. I had no money. I chubbed out with my bags and we sped off. We did the runner on so many hotels because we had no money. It was funny days, really funny.
Really good. But the fact that you lived through that, and you've created a better world for these young triathletes, right? Man. Through Super League, and just sharing those experiences for them to understand, hey, right now you've got Super League, you got World Triathlon, you've got Challenge, you've got Ironman, you got 70.3.
Yeah, you got the PTO series.
You got PTO series. There's so many more options than you guys had back in the day. And it's a great era to be a professional triathlete.
You make some good money, you have a great time. They're a really, really talented group of athletes. Like I would never have imagined that triathletes could be as rounded as they are nowadays. They're looking at these Ironman times going, whoa, far out. It's obscene, and so as a fan of the sport, which I've been able to fall back to and be, I love it. I get to live it every day. Even I don't have to suffer anymore, but I get to be inspired by this generation as I was inspired by the Marks, the Daves. Right. I just love watching it and being a part of it. It's really cool. Love it.
We need to get you back to our CF event one of these years.
Yeah, I've got
30th anniversary, man. 30 years. Can you believe that?
Are you still riding from San Francisco all the way
They're
in?
doing that. They've got 175 riders going from San Francisco to San Diego, leaving on the 14th of October and finishing in San Diego.
I remember the last time I did it, I think we stayed up here at the Sheraton.
Well, and also you guys, that was a year you had rain and locusts, and you basically every plague there was, you guys had it that year. But my favorite story from that was you finished at the La Jolla Shores Park, and the year before you had come to the triathlon.
Yes.
You're like, I need to bring my girls to see this.
Yeah, totally.
And the following year, you had your girls there.
Yeah.
And the ride is coming in, and all of our kids are jumping hurdles, and all of our challenges have missing legs, missing arms. They're all playing. And your wife said to your daughter, honey, why don't you go play with those other kids? And she's like, well, I can't play with them. I don't have a magic leg.
I don't have magic legs. I remember. We only talked about that recently. That we went down, my kids were here, they're all old now, 21, and we just went down to La Jolla, and we actually brought that, we just went down to catch up with friends, and and we talked about that, and they remembered it. Yeah.
That is so
in
cool.
The park.
I use that story all the time because that's really the change over the years has been where people our age, I'm 30 years old, and would be hiding a prosthetic leg,
yes.
right? They wouldn't be sharing. But now when I love it when a kid says, this makes you different in a good way.
Yeah, totally.
That's
without question. You're doing amazing things. It's awesome.
Thank you, buddy. Always a pleasure to catch up with you.
Absolutely.
Anytime I get an opportunity to interview this guy, and I don't even look at any notes. We just talk.
We just catching up.
We just catch up. Chris McCormack has been our guest. Thank you for everything
Bob.
you're bringing to the sport. Thank you for always being so supportive.
Thank you.
Macca, Chris McCormack, 2-time Ironman World Champion, joins us. This is a wrap for Super League Malibu Breakfast with Bob. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Hey, and a lot of these kids that you're going to see, the Alex Yee, a lot of these folks who you guys might not know because you're Ironman based, you need to listen to these guys because this is the future. These are the athletes you're going to see for the next 20 years. So check out all of our interviews. Beth Potter, Alex Yee, amazing, amazing athletes. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll catch you next time. See ya.